So for those of you who've been following me recently, you know that I've been very fascinated with China. I've made a few comments about George Soros and his position with BlackRock in the country. But there is one particular incident that has been making headlines that I think is truly very noteworthy. And what I'm talking about is Evergrande. You've probably seen this headline somewhere, but I think we really should take notice because this truly is a very significant moment in the context of the country and also really its economy and what's about to happen next. I think we're about to see maybe a Lehman Brothers sort of situation if nothing proper is being done about it. So tonight I want to talk to you a bit about Evergrande and why I think it's so significant and why I think it's so fascinating. Now, for those of you who don't know, Evergrande is actually this massive real estate company in China. Apparently, I think they have developed over 1,000 different projects throughout the country and also other parts of the world. And besides that, they're also a business conglomerate in diverse industries. And what's happened recently is that they're in financial distress. As you've seen in some of my comments recently, Beijing has actually been cracking down on the private sector, reforming many parts of it. And part of its reform is actually reforming the financing in the country, making it a bit more difficult for companies to actually borrow money. And Evergrande is one of the most indebted countries. It's been running heavily on debt, using debt to expand its business. And to date, it has more than $305 billion in debt and its liabilities. And now it's facing liquidity issues. It doesn't have enough access to finance and cash to operate. So it's very likely going to entirely collapse if nothing proper is being done about it. It's incredible when you think about something that's happened, at least to the scale. How did it get so much in debt? Well, for many of the developments in China, especially in real estate, incredible thing is that 30% of the GDP actually comes from this industry. And many of the players, the real estate players in China, they have a very similar model. They would essentially get access to finance, so loans, and then they would buy land and develop maybe some buildings and then write that as assets, so they essentially have more assets. And then they'll gain more access to more financing, again, increasing their liability. Then furthermore, to buy more, to build, and then to borrow more. And the same thing, we see the same sort of cycle happening over and over again. And this is essentially what's happened to Evergrande on this massive scale. Very aggressively, they have been using this model to essentially aggressively buy land and develop all these real estate properties. And now it's gotten to the point where they no longer can easily access the financing. And because of that, they're running into issues, not only in their operations and their developments, but also to really pay back their existing liabilities that are on a more tight deadline. And because of this, it is very much on the brink of collapse. Now, you might be wondering, why so significant, this one company? Well, first of all, of course, 305 billion is a lot. But the significance is in the fact that this group has gotten so big, and in all its developments, it's involving so many different industries that if they were to go bust, which they are at the moment, many of its suppliers and of course the overall network of its supply chain, its value chain, all of them, they would be affected. We're talking about hundreds of other businesses and of course other industries are equally involved. They would be affected if it were to go under. Not to mention most directly the people, the homeowners who've actually purchased some of these properties, which may not be fully developed yet. Again, now they're running out of money and they are not able to actually continue developments. People will be out of homes. And also not to mention the fact that, if, let's say, this company was to go into liquidation, what will happen is, of course, someone will take over and they'll start to shed all these properties, again, at generally lower prices, which will affect also the overall property market, leading to a very vicious cycle. And also, of course, the entire environment in terms of the financial environment of China will be one that would sort of discourage other foreign investors to participate or affect their sentiments too. So very much what we're seeing here could be a situation that's very similar to the Lehman Brothers, especially in how it went under and the impact it's had really on the economy. We might see the same thing here. Now, the very interesting thing is, of course, the Beijing government, they could intervene and bail out this company, which would be, I suppose, the most logical step. But again, the Beijing government has recently cracked down on private businesses, especially in the aspect of financing. So if they were to truly to bail out entirely Evergrande rather than let it solve its own problems, then again, it sets a really bad example for other companies who are following suit maybe. So again, there's an issue there. But at the same time, if they don't, it seems unlikely that Evergrande will be able to really solve the issue on its own. Whatever it is, there will be massive impact for the economy if this thing isn't solved. As I mentioned, because of the impact on the overall chain of the industries involved, as I mentioned, also on the impact on the consumers and ultimately the impact on the foreign direct investments and the sentiments there. But truly very fascinating, because at least the model of development for China, at least in the real estate industry, but also in many other industries, is the same. They are very highly leveraged. They have the same sort of really aggressive model, but largely run on debt. And now with the central government in Beijing actually cracking down, again, we might see the same thing happening widespread in other industries, other companies too, especially notable ones. So I think Evergrande is really fascinating, and certainly a company and a development we should really look into recently. The significance of this entire debacle is really the redefinition of business in China. This entire debacle really sparked off because the central government in Beijing decided to become more aggressive in its regulation of private business and really to change the practices of it. And the impact is, of course, felt in this example of Evergrande. But again, the way that business was done was too aggressive. It led to a lot of development, at least on paper. But again, a question of whether it is a development that is really built on solid grounds. So Evergrande was able to get these loans because, of course, by accumulating all these lands and building these properties, these buildings, it was able to really write up its assets. But of course, a building on a piece of land, and especially in the scale of the development, these are not liquid assets. First of all, we don't really know if the asset value that's being declared is its actual value in the market. And furthermore, also, whether it's actually easy to sell these assets when it comes to it, whether there really is a demand for it. And so it's been expanding really aggressively with these paper numbers for its assets, but the reality is a totally different picture. And of course, this sort of situation is now being challenged by the new environment that's being created by the central government. So it is very fascinating. So in a way, the crisis is sparked off by new regulation, essentially by the government. But in another way, it is also because of the business practices that have pervaded for such a long time, which are too aggressive and maybe too risky. And this landscape going forward, it is interesting to see not only the impact, as we are now seeing potentially with Evergrande, but also really the landscape going forward. I think it truly is very fascinating.